So the HER2CLIMB trial was a randomized, blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trial that tested the value of adding tucatinib, the HER2 selective tyrosine kinase inhibitor, to a backbone of trastuzumab and capecitabine in patients with metastatic HER2-positive breast cancer. And what was unique about HER2CLIMB is that it allowed patients with brain metastases on not just stable treated brain metastases, which is fairly typical nowadays, but also patients with either newly diagnosed or progressive at the time of study entry brain metastases, and that's very unique for this particular trial. The top-line results of HER2CLIMB have already been published, which showed an improvement in both progression-free survival and overall survival for the overall population of patients with and without brain metastases enrolled on the study. And this analysis focuses on the subset of 291 patients in HER2CLIMB who had brain metastases at study entry. And what we found is that when we looked at time to CNS progression, that is CNS progression-free survival, defined as time from randomization until CNS progression or death, that the addition of tucatinib significantly prolonged CNS PFS in patients with brain metastases. And in addition, there was a significant prolongation of overall survival in these patients with a hazard ratio of 0.58, and that translated into a 6-month absolute improvement in median survival. So, about half of patients with HER2-positive metastatic breast cancer will develop brain metastases over the course of their disease. So having effective treatments, not only to treat patients with brain metastases, but also to prolong the time to CNS progression, is a really important benefit for patients. And I think that really that's where these results need to be taken into context. Tucatinib has been recently approved by the FDA for use in patients with HER2-positive metastatic breast cancer, and I think that these results further solidify the value of tucatinib in patients with HER2-positive disease. Yes, so there are a number of other compounds that have demonstrated activity in terms of CNS objective response. In the case of tucatinib, within the HER2CLIMB trial, we looked at the subset of patients with measurable active brain metastases at baseline, and nearly half of those patients achieved a CNS objective response. Other studies with other tyrosine kinase inhibitors, including neratinib and lapatinib, have also shown CNS activity. But what was unique about the HER2CLIMB trial is the randomized nature of the study and the fact that the addition of tucatinib actually produced not only objective responses, but an overall survival advantage for these patients. Yes, so we actually had previously conducted a phase 1b study that was led by a colleague, Dr. Otto Metzger at Dana-Farber, that combined just tucatinib and trastuzumab without any chemotherapy. And the trial actually enrolled only patients with active brain metastases. We did show that there was a modest rate of CNS objective response, although it was quite modest. And there were several patients with prolonged clinical benefit, that is defined as stable disease for 16 weeks or longer. And what was unique about that phase 1b study is it actually allowed patients who had had prior lapatinib and neratinib, because one question that's not fully answered at this point is what is the benefit of successive lines of HER2 TKIs? Interestingly, in our phase 1b study, which was recently published online in Annals of Oncology, we found that of the patients with clinical benefit, 80% had had prior lapatinib or neratinib exposure. So I think that's very encouraging. So tucatinib is now being evaluated in a number of different settings. For example, the HER2CLIMB-02 trial is randomizing patients with to TDM1 alone or TDM1 plus tucatinib in the second-line setting, and really understand whether tucatinib has a role earlier in the treatment of HER2-positive metastatic breast cancer. And HER2CLIMB-02, just like the initial HER2CLIMB trial, does allow patients either with or without brain metastases to enroll. In addition, the TBCRC is conducting a study of the trastuzumab capecitabine tucatinib regimen in patients who have HER2-positive leptomeningeal disease, because those patients were excluded from the original HER2CLIMB study. It's important to understand whether the regimen has activity in LMD. And finally, there are plans to incorporate tucatinib in the early stage setting, essentially a Catherine-like design of patients with residual disease after standard trastuzumab-containing chemotherapy who will be randomized to TDM1 with or without tucatinib in the postoperative adjuvant setting.